Evening all. In September 1862, James Glaisher and Henry Coxwell got into a hot air balloon to perform an incredible scientific experiment. They were going to go as high as the balloon could take them in order to investigate the high altitude climate, but also what effect high altitude had on the human body and how high was it possible to go in a hot air balloon. They achieved a height definitely recorded at 29,000 feet, which is the approximate height of Mount Everest. They may have gone as high as 31,000 feet. And these men had no supplemental oxygen. This was 1862. They knew that high altitudes, the air was thin, but they didn't know how thin it was going to be. It was a huge risk. It's an amazing story. Glaisher actually passed out at about 8,800 meters, and Coxwell almost passed out, but he was just able to use the balloon controls to manage the descent to get them back down to ground, which wasn't easy because the system had been covered in ice. That was the other thing that they discovered out there, was the drop in temperatures and how things would freeze at that altitude. So it was an incredible scientific journey, one that brought back a heap of scientific data that was very useful in the not just the years afterwards, but decades, century after. It gave the world knowledge of what happens at high altitudes. It became very useful when flying aircraft at that altitude, but also mountaineering at that altitude as well. So there's a film that's just been released this week called The Aeronauts, which is, according to the blurb on the official merchandise, is that it's inspired by true events. So what this film does is that it has a bit of a preamble about Glaisher trying to raise funds and trying to convince the Royal Society that this balloon flight is vital and important. And then the bulk of the film is a kind of real-time depiction of the ascent and the descent and all the perils that the balloonists encountered along the way. Now, I say inspired by true events because they've kept the character of James Glaisher, but they've made some heavy modifications. One of them being that Glaisher in real life was in his early 50s, and yet they've cast Eddie Redmayne, an actor in his 30s. And Redmayne is kind of trotting out his nerdy, on the autistic spectrum scientist routine that he used in Fantastic Beasts and The Theory of Everything. It's something that he does particularly well as an actor, but he's relying on this. It's not really a depiction of the real James Glaisher. However, what has attracted some controversy is how they've depicted Henry Coxwell, which is that they've got rid of him altogether and replaced him with a fictional female balloonist called Annie Wren. Now, Annie Wren is a character who's a composite of two female balloonists of the 19th century, although the two characters she's based on lived some considerable years before 1862. They were around about in the time of Napoleon Bonaparte. So it's not exactly a historical match, but she's a fictional character, and she is in part based on these two real-life 19th century balloonists. I avoid using the term Victorian balloonists because they weren't Victorians. So this has created some controversy, and for me it presents some problems. Now, I've not seen The Aeronauts yet. I've seen the trailer. I've listened to a review and an interview with the director on BBC Radio 4's Front Row. I've read a couple of other reviews. I've seen Mark Commode's review of it as well. So this is really based on that. But from the looks of the film, from what people who have seen it say is that it's a very exciting film, and I have no doubt that the technical drama is going to be superb in this film. The visuals, they filmed quite a lot of it on a real balloon going up, but obviously for the really high altitude stuff, they're doing green screen and CGI. But still, the attention to detail, every peril that the balloonists go on is something that would be found in reality. Most of it happened to Glaisher and Coxwell when they were on their ascent. Some of it's been brought in from experience of other balloonists of that age and the real science of what happens when you get to these very high altitudes. So, from that point of view, the peril, the danger, the visuals, I think it's going to be an excellent film from that point of view. And I think the acting by Eddie Redmayne and Annie Wren being played by Felicity Jones, again, I don't think there'll be too many complaints on that score. But we start talking about how much do you bend history to make good drama if you're doing a historical drama. And this is always a tricky one to negotiate. I mean, you can have fantastic films where the history is sometimes made up. So, in the film version of Waterloo, the 1971, the Duke of Wellington, played by Christopher Plummer, gets to say a load of real quotes from the Duke, but they weren't said at Waterloo. Some he said years before at other battles. Likewise, in Zulu, the 24th Foot didn't sing Men of Harlech at the climax of the battle. But does that impact overall on the real history and the story of those events? Well, you can argue whether they do or they don't. I think in the case of the Aeronauts, Annie Wren presents some problems, and the way they're depicting James Glaisher, Eddie Redmayne as James Glaisher, I think presents some problems as well. As well as kind of the framing device of the Royal Society backing this expedition. In real life, the Royal Society were 100% in favour of this expedition. They agreed with Glaisher. Glaisher put forward the proposal, and they all thought it was a great idea. And the funds were provided. The balloon that they actually used in 1862 was a top design. It was cutting edge for its time. It was a massive balloon, and it was designed and constructed by Coxwell's company. He was a professional balloonist. So in the film, the Royal Society are their usual bewhiskered elderly Victorian gentlemen going, "Harumph, it will never work! Damn your eyes! Damn your impertinence, man!" They take this negative attitude, and that didn't happen in real life. So that creates one problem. But as the director said on Front Row, he needed to have some spark in it because Coxwell and Glaisher worked well together. They were a team. They didn't fight, argue, or bicker during the flight. And the Royal Society backed them, so you need to add a bit of spice. So let's have a sceptical Royal Society, and let's have a male-female dynamic going on in the balloon. Okay, so that brings me to the next point. When you look at the trailer, the film is promoting Annie Wren, the fictional character, as the main hero of the film instead of the real-life historical counterpart. She gets all the best snappy soundbite dialogue, and she's the one that's always has the right idea, always assesses the situation perfectly. And this was borne out by, in the interview on Front Row, the presenter, I think it was John Wilson, but he said to the director, Glaisher comes across as a bit of an idiot, a liability. And certainly from the trailer and from what reviewers say, that Glaisher is being depicted, he's idealistic. He's got this idea that they should go high up in this balloon, to go to an extreme altitude to investigate climate and to see what the effects of high altitude has on the human body. So he's idealistic. But during the journey, he becomes more of a liability. He's pushing the science aspect at the risk of their own lives. And him and Annie Wren bicker about this, whereas in real life, Coxwell and Glaisher didn't bicker about such things. So it looks like Annie Wren is going to be a Mary Sue character. She's going to be flawless. She's going to have the perfect judgment. She's going to have all the skills. And the trailer shows her sort of climbing up on the outside of the balloon, trying to free ice that's trapping important mechanisms to keep the balloon going so that they don't just plummet like a stone from the sky. Whereas Glacier is just kind of there going, oh, I'm running out of oxygen, and being stubborn and useless. This to me is a narrative problem because I don't like Mary Sue's or Marty Stu's in these films. It looks like they're in Annie Wren, they're creating a Ray for this picture. And the critics, the kind of more progressive left woke critics, are praising it. This is finally a character, a Victorian historical character, not a historical character, that young girls, young women can identify with and aspire to be. Maybe she can influence people to do great things. Yes, but she's fictional. You know, it's an idealized character. It's ephemeral, and it does a disservice to the real history because the actual Royal Society today, one of their leading scientists, Kenneth Moore, said it's a shame that Henry Coxwell has to be written out of history. You know, when he contributed a great deal to this expedition. And that's how I feel. You know, you've written out somebody, a real person, and they were an interesting person in themselves, in that they designed the balloon. You know, and they knew it. And Coxwell instinctively knew the controls and what to do in an emergency situation. They're going to transfer this to Annie Wren, but from what I can gather, she doesn't actually build the balloon. It's not her company. She's got to fight the kind of the bewhiskered elderly Victorian general going, "Rob woman, damn your eyes, damn your impertinence." So there's going to be a bit of that, just trying to make her. She's got all the sass, and it's going to do disservice to the history, and it's just going to look like the Victorian era goes woke. Now, the other problem I have with this is that it's going to give the audience the wrong impression. People will come away thinking Annie Wren was a real person, and that Glaisher was a bit of a nincompoop, and that they're not going to know the name Henry Coxwell at all from this. And this puts it now in the league of when Dan Snow said to his daughters in the Imperial War Museum that that women Spitfire pilots flew combat missions, which was untrue, but he didn't want to crush their dreams, so he made something up. And I feel that the character of Annie Wren is doing the same thing here. In order to inspire women, we have to make this woman up. We have to get rid of a man and put a woman in his place, and then say she's the main star. She's the real hero of this story, and not the real history. Now, there is a way they could have got around this. Is take the actual balloon ride, but make both characters fictional. You know, just use it as the balloon ride as a backdrop. This isn't the Glaisher Coxwell flight. This is another flight that happened round about the same time, and the same things happen. A little bit augmented, but make both characters fictional. And there is a precedence in film history for this. There's a very good late 1950s film produced by Disney called Banner in the Sky, which is a fictionalized account of the ascent of the Matterhorn. So what they did was that they took the real history of the first successful attempt to climb the summit of the Matterhorn, but they had just completely fictional characters, and they avoided calling the mountain the Matterhorn. They called it the Citadel, but it has the exact same shape as the real Matterhorn. So it's a good film, and even though all the characters are fictitious, it doesn't take away the drama. In fact, you can compartmentalize it. Yes, this is the mountaineering that they depict in that film is accurate to how mountaineering was done in the mid-Victorian period. And likewise, they could have done this with Glaisher and Coxwell's ascent. They could have just said this is going to be based on that real life event, but we just make everybody fictional. You know, we and you can have Eddie Redmayne and Felicity Jones. I think it would be better if Jones had any kind of visible weaknesses other than the fact that she's a woman struggling to get recognition and acknowledgement in a patriarchal society. That she had some actual definite character flaws that Redmayne's character complements. But I don't think that's the route that they've gone down. Certainly from the reviews I've seen and from the trailer, he's the doofus, she's the Mary Sue. So anyway, don't. I think there's still enough in the film to make it enjoyable, but I think that's what they've done with this Annie Wren character is, and also how they've interpreted Glaisher. It's going to take me out of the film. I'm just going to go there saying the visuals are great, the drama's great, but I can't get fully engrossed because the characters they're not being done good service here. So until next time, I'll see you later. And, well, I think I'll go and see the Midway film and see how that holds up historically. See you later.